And I want to ask you, before we go into the three different topics of those three interlinked revolutions that this book proposes, what made you write such a book? What made you devote 9 years of your life and ruin yourself financially and every other way to create something as ambitious as this? What drove you? What were the recognitions and revelations that led you personally to risk getting a book like this out?
I coined a word in my teenage misspent youth, Lutheromania, and it just means a mania for freedom. I could, as a teenager, I just felt so acutely how the institutions that were trying to shape me were funneling my thinking down these well-worn corridors, and I rebelled at it, but I knew I was powerless to escape those grooves because they were the product of my culture, and I couldn't question my culture because I was as much a product of my culture as were the buildings and the language and the artifacts around me. The teenage rebel within me at one point stood at this fork in a road. One fork led to the University of Toronto and studying physics. And the other fork led into the dark unknown. I'd seen a performance of a classical Japanese play that shook me to my roots, baffled me beyond speaking, in its beauty, its power, its restraint. And I had joined a theater company downtown Toronto. I'd studied theater, and here's this 400-year-old classical Japanese show that A, violated every precept I'd been taught about what is necessary for making good theater, and B, had a more profound effect on me than any show in the Western canon I'd ever seen. So ultimately, the Japanese theater baffled me more deeply than the physics. So Japan was alluring, and I didn't have any money. I was 18, but I was 18. It didn't seem unreasonable that if I went to England and bought a bike and started pedaling and was headed in the right direction and didn't stop pedaling, then eventually I'd get there. And that's sort of the way it happened. But I passed through all these different ways of understanding what it means to be human. And every one of them made sense to me. And the only time I really suffered culture shock was when I came back home to the utterly familiar and utterly bizarre and arbitrary culture that I'd left 2 years earlier. And that trip enabled me to ask questions. Now, the questions that need asking are not sophisticated questions. Sophistry means knowledge. To ask a sophisticated question means you're leaning on a body of knowledge. The questions we need are the questions a child would ask. And I couldn't ask those questions. An example of that, a question: what's better, up or down?
Interesting.
Well, how do you? I mean, they're both necessary. I mean, you don't even have up unless there's a down. Well, then why is it that in our culture up is good and down is bad? In every stratum of our thinking. Up, I'm feeling up today. Oh, I'm feeling in the dumps today. Things are looking up. Things are looking down. Market's up. Sun's coming up. Hell is down, heaven is up. When we map out the world, well, north is up, Because that's where we are. Completely arbitrary. Why isn't south up? Because that's where the other people are. And up is good. Right, so where does that come from? Up is good over and over and over. In our language, in our thinking, in our behavior, we want to live in the penthouse. What's that about? Well, the penthouse is up above the world, removed from it with a vista of everything and kind of detached. There's a fundamental principle that informs every phrase of my book. And that principle is, as we relate to the body, so we relate to the world. Up is good, down is bad. Up is heaven, down is hell. Up is the head. I'm getting ahead. Use your head, young man. That's how we think. We use our head. And you know what? Two heads are better than one. I mean, two hearts are better than one. Is there no other? No, we're head obsessed. And this we take to be normal. This we take to be the way people are. It's the human condition. It's like wallpaper. You stop seeing it because it's the normal with which you've been raised. It's what you've absorbed since the time of childhood. And all these issues worked on me.
And that other question that you asked was, why do we live only in our heads? Isn't that the question that really broke you free? How did it come to you, that question?
For entertainment, as a teenager, I loved reading dictionaries. I'm sorry, there's no explaining it. Anyway, in the Oxford English Dictionary, it talked, the word I was looking up may have been frenetic, but it listed phrene, this Greek word phrene, that means mind and diaphragm. What's that about? So there's a Greek word that means mind, and it means diaphragm. That sat with me for years. Then I learned that Homer had used this word. Homer, in the ancient language of the Odyssey and the Iliad, he uses the word phrenos over and over and over. And the questions, when I went to Japan and I finally started to understand no theater, what enabled that understanding was the Japanese concept of hara. Now, hara means belly. But this is not a semantic issue. Where we use head in phraseology, the Japanese use the word belly. We say he's level-headed. They say he has a well-developed belly. We say he's hot-headed. His belly rises easily. For the Japanese, the deepest seat of their truth is in the belly. So when a Japanese actor raises his hand, he is centered in that place, and the hand, because the belly is the place that brings us into relationship. It's where our being lies, as opposed to our thinking. It's something I came to realize slowly.
And we're going to go there.